Did you know 9 human mistakes that changed history forever? His hand trembled on the steering wheel as the Jeep sped across the runway. Behind him, 3 F-106 Delta Dart fighter jets roared their engines, ready for takeoff. Inside each aircraft, nuclear missiles. Destination, the Soviet Union. Time to prevent the apocalypse, 15 seconds. Captain John Chenoweth didn't think. He just drove straight in front of the planes, waving his arms frantically, shouting something the pilots could never hear over the deafening roar of the turbines. A bear. A damn brown bear had climbed the fence at Duluth Air Force Base that October morning in 1962, setting off the wrong alarm because of faulty wiring. And now, World War III was 15 seconds away from starting. If Chenoweth had hesitated 3 seconds longer, if he had stopped to think about the logic of the situation, if he had simply followed protocol and waited for confirmation, you wouldn't be here now. None of us would be. But he didn't hesitate, and the world continued to exist. This story is real. Documented. Filed in the U.S. military records as the bear incident that almost started a nuclear war. And you know what's even scarier? It's just one of 9 times when a single human error, a second of poor judgment, a miscalculation, a misplaced word, changed the entire course of human history. We're not talking about grand conspiracies or elaborate plans. We're talking about everyday moments when someone made a mistake. And that mistake triggered a cascade of consequences that spanned centuries, killed millions, saved millions, discovered continents, toppled empires, and redrew the map of the world you know today. The question that has haunted historians for decades is this: why do small mistakes have such huge consequences? And is there a pattern to it? Is there any way to predict when an ordinary moment is about to become a historic turning point? The year was 1218. The location, the vast steppes of Central Asia, where Mongol tribes newly unified under a ruthless leader watched the horizon with a mixture of curiosity and controlled ambition. Genghis Khan did not want war. Not this time. He had just unified the nomadic Mongol tribes after decades of bloody conflict, transforming scattered warriors into a lethal military machine that had already conquered vast territories. But war is expensive. It kills men. It destroys resources. And the Khan, as brutal as he was on the battlefield, was pragmatic when it came to economics. So he did something unusual. He sent merchants. A caravan of 450 Mongol merchants, laden with silk, furs and jade, crossed the border of the Khwarezmian Empire with a singularly peaceful mission: to negotiate, to establish trade routes, to ensure that both sides profited without bloodshed. It was diplomacy through the marketplace, a smart move that would benefit everyone. Governor Inalchuk welcomed them to the city of Otrar. And he made the mistake that would kill 1 million people. Inalchuk looked at these narrow-eyed men, with their strange clothes and incomprehensible language, and saw only one thing: spies. He didn't just arrest the merchants. He confiscated all their goods, declaring them the property of the Khwarezmian Empire. And then, to send a clear message to the Mongols, he executed all 450 men. Public beheading. Their heads were piled in the central square of Otrar as a warning. When the news reached Genghis Khan, witnesses report that he was silent for 3 whole days. There were no shouts. There were no immediate threats. Just an icy silence that made his generals instinctively retreat, recognizing the kind of fury that precedes not a battle, but systematic extermination. On the 4th day, Khan did something that surprised everyone. He sent ambassadors. 3 men, carrying a respectful letter to Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, supreme ruler of the Khwarezmian Empire. The message was straightforward: your governor Inalchuk has committed a grave error. Hand him over for justice, and we will consider the matter closed. It was the last chance for peace. The last opportunity to avoid what would follow. The Shah read the letter. He consulted his advisors. And he made the decision that would destroy his empire. He ordered one of Genghis Khan's ambassadors to be beheaded. The other 2 had their beards completely shaved off before being expelled back to Mongolia. For the Mongols, the beard was not just facial hair. They were physical honor. They were identity. To have one's beard torn off was the equivalent of having one's soul desecrated, one's masculinity publicly annihilated. When those two ambassadors returned, staggering across the steps with their faces mutilated, carrying their companion's head in a bloody bag, Genghis Khan finally spoke. A single sentence: "Prepare all the horses." What happened in 1219 was not a war. It was an erasure. If you're feeling the tension rising, wondering how mistakes like this are repeated throughout human history, you won't want to miss what comes next. Subscribe to the channel, because these 9 stories will show you how the world you know was built on moments of error that no one imagined would change everything. The army that marched on the Khwarezmian Empire in 1219 had 200,000 horsemen. They moved like a living storm across the plains, covering up to 160 kilometers a day, a speed that European armies of the time considered physically impossible. They carried no baggage. They had no supply lines. Each warrior had 3 horses that he rotated so as never to lose speed. Genghis Khan divided his forces into 5 columns that attacked simultaneously at points thousands of kilometers apart, creating the illusion that the Mongol army was 3 times larger than it actually was. The psychological strategy worked. Entire cities surrendered without a fight when they saw the cloud of dust on the horizon, knowing that resistance meant total annihilation. Otrar, the city where Inalchuq had executed the merchants, was surrounded first. The siege lasted 5 months. When the walls finally fell, the Mongols did something methodical. They separated the entire population into 3 groups. Craftsmen and people with useful skills were spared and taken as slaves. Strong young men were incorporated into the Mongol army as disposable troops on the front lines. Everyone else, the elderly, children, anyone considered useless, was executed. But Inalchuq had a special fate. The intercepted letter revealed the truth. Inalchuq had not mistaken the merchants for spies. He knew exactly who they were. But he had stolen the goods to enrich himself, selling Mongolian silk and jade on the black market. The execution of the merchants was just to eliminate witnesses. Pure greed. A theft he thought no one would discover, because who would declare war over a few dead merchants? Genghis Khan ordered molten silver to be poured into Inalchuq's eyes and ears. Alive. The message was clear. You wanted gold? Die drowned in precious metal. Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad watched his empire crumble in real time. He had ruled one of the richest territories in the world, controlling the trade routes between East and West, commanding an army that on paper was 3 times larger than the Mongol army. But he made the classic mistake of every historical antagonist. He underestimated the cost of humiliating a powerful man. When he realized the magnitude of his mistake, when cities began to fall like dominoes and refugees flooded his capital with stories of systematic massacres, the Shah did the only thing left for him to do. He fled. He abandoned his army. He abandoned his people. He even abandoned his family. He ran from city to city, always one step ahead of the Mongols, until his body simply gave out. He died alone, hidden on a miserable island in the Caspian Sea, while his empire burned. In the ruins of Merv, one of the largest cities in the world at the time, the Mongols executed more than 700,000 people in a single week. Mothers smothered their own babies so their cries would not alert the soldiers. Entire families committed mass suicide to avoid torture. The few survivors reported that the Mongols were so methodical that they returned days later to kill anyone who had hidden under the bodies of the dead. The Khwarezmian Empire ceased to exist in 18 months. Simply wiped off the map. And all because a greedy governor stole goods and a proud Shah refused to apologize. But here's what history books rarely mention. The violence didn't start with the Mongols. It just found the perfect vehicle through human error. Inalchuq and the Shah did not create monsters. They just unleashed one that already existed, pointing it in their own direction. This pattern would repeat itself countless times throughout history. People in power making impulsive, arrogant, or greedy decisions, thinking they are above the consequences. And then, surprise! The consequences arrive. 1700 years earlier, on another continent, another emperor learned this lesson in the most humiliating way possible. Constantine V was known as the Cunning. Emperor of Byzantium, he maintained such an efficient network of spies within enemy territories that his adversaries swore he could read minds. Every time Bulgaria planned an attack, Constantine was already waiting. Every conspiracy was uncovered before it could come to fruition. Every military move was countered before it even began. Telerig, the Bulgarian Khan, was becoming paranoid. How did Constantine always know everything? Who was betraying Bulgaria? Then Telerig had a brilliant idea. So brilliant that it would be taught in military academies centuries later as the perfect diplomatic coup. He sent a secret messenger to Constantinople with a proposal. He, Telerig, was tired of ruling. He wanted to defect to the Byzantine Empire, bringing with him all the Bulgarian royal treasures. But he needed help. He needed to know who he could trust within his own court. Constantine, seeing the opportunity to gain both a valuable ally and weaken Bulgaria from within, did the unthinkable. He sent a complete list. Names, positions, contact codes. All his spies within the Bulgarian court, organized on a sealed parchment. Telerig must have smiled when he opened that scroll. The following week, 47 Bulgarian nobles were arrested simultaneously in different cities. All executed on the same morning. The Byzantine intelligence network that had taken decades to build was destroyed in 24 hours. Constantine V spent the rest of his reign trying to rebuild what he had lost. He never succeeded. His subsequent military campaigns against Bulgaria ended in humiliating failures because he was operating in the dark, while Telerig always knew exactly what the Byzantines were planning. A moment of overconfidence. A 2-minute decision. Consequences that lasted for generations. But at least Constantine still had his throne. Others were not so lucky. In 2001, at Tokyo Disneyland, Japanese security guards intercepted a man with a forged Dominican passport. He was standing in line for Pirates of the Caribbean when he realized he had been identified. The man did not resist arrest. He just sighed, as if he already knew that his life was over at that moment. His name was Kim Jong-nam, and that fake passport would cost an empire. Kim Jong-nam was the eldest son of Kim Jong-il, second in line to North Korea's dynastic succession. Raised to rule an entire nation, educated at the best schools a totalitarian regime could offer, prepared since childhood to eventually control the fate of 25 million people. But he had a problem. He wanted to see Disney. Not metaphorically. Literally. He was obsessed with Tokyo Disneyland and risked everything, his inheritance, his safety, his life, to visit a theme park. What the media didn't report at the time was that Kim Jong-nam wasn't alone. He was taking his 4-year-old son. The child had begged to meet Mickey Mouse, and Jong-nam, in a rare moment of humanity that completely contradicted his totalitarian upbringing, decided that fulfilling his son's wish was worth more than any security protocol. North Korea considered this an act of treason. Not just the passport forgery, but the symbolic act of taking a child of the Kim dynasty to a symbol of Western capitalism. Kim Jong-il was furious not only at the mistake, but at what it represented: weakness, sentimentality, paternal love above duty to the state. Kim Jong-nam was exiled that same month. His younger brother, Kim Jong-un, was elevated to first in line of succession. And Jong-nam began a nomadic life, wandering between Macau, Singapore, and Malaysia, always looking over his shoulder, always knowing that one day revenge would come. He lasted 16 years. On February 13, 2017, Kim Jong-nam walked through Kuala Lumpur International Airport as he had done hundreds of times before. Backpack on his back, headphones hanging around his neck, moving with the false confidence of someone who thought that 16 years of exile had made his death irrelevant to Pyongyang. He didn't see the two women approaching from behind. The first rubbed something on his face. Quickly, as if it were a joke. 3 seconds later, the second did the same on the other side. Both laughed and ran away, as if they had just played a hilarious prank. Jong-nam felt the burning immediately. He staggered to the information desk, pointing to his own face, trying to articulate words as his throat began to close. But even before the ambulance reached the hospital, Kim Jong-nam was dead. The substance was VX, a nerve agent so lethal that a drop the size of a pinhead can kill an adult man in 15 minutes. It is the kind of chemical weapon that only governments possess. The two young women swore, in tears during the trial, that they thought they were filming a prank for a reality show. They had been recruited weeks earlier by producers who paid them to play harmless pranks on strangers. $100 per video. On the day of the murder, they said it was just another prank. They didn't know they were holding half of a binary chemical weapon. Together, the substances created lethal VX. The producers disappeared. North Korea denied everything. And it all started because a father wanted to take his 4-year-old son to meet Mickey Mouse. Konstantin V's vulnerability had deep roots. As a child, he was poisoned by conspirators who tried to assassinate his father. Konstantin survived, but the trauma left him obsessed with loyalty. He needed to know who his true allies were. When Telerig offered that confirmation through a list, Konstantin couldn't resist. His greatest strength was born of his greatest fear. And Telerig exploited exactly that. But not all historical mistakes were born of trauma or greed. Some were born of something much more mundane, bad math. Christopher Columbus was desperate. He had spent years trying to convince European monarchs to fund his expedition, to sail straight west across the Atlantic to reach the spices of Asia. The problem was that everyone who really understood math knew the idea was suicidal. The distance was too great. No ship could carry enough food. They would die in the middle of the ocean. But Columbus had different calculations. About 2,300 miles from the Canary Islands to Japan, perfectly feasible. He was wrong. The actual distance was almost 20,000 kilometers. Columbus had read ancient texts but converted all the measurements wrong. Where they said longer Arab miles, he read shorter Roman miles. It was like confusing kilometers with meters and making plans based on that mistake. The scientific advisors showed him the correct calculations. You will die in the middle of the ocean. But Columbus was insistent, persuasive, and he approached Queen Isabella at a time when she was looking for any advantage over Portugal. She financed the expedition. 3 ships, 90 men, supplies calculated for the wrong distance. If America didn't exist, the entire crew would have died. Columbus would have become a historical footnote. But America did exist, right in the middle of the way, exactly where Columbus incorrectly calculated Japan would be. What Columbus never knew was that the scientists who rejected him were also wrong. They thought the Earth was smaller than it really is. 2 mathematical errors accidentally cancelled each other out and created the Age of Discovery. The discovery changed everything. Trade routes, empires, the very makeup of humanity. A unit conversion error redrew the planet. But at least it saved lives. Other errors were not so kind. China, 1958. Mao Zedong looked at the rice fields and saw a problem. Sparrows. Millions of them, pecking at the precious grains. The solution seemed obvious. Eliminate the sparrows. The 4 Pests campaign mobilized the entire population. Children destroyed nests. Adults received bonuses for each bird killed. In 2 years, the sparrow population was virtually wiped out. And then came 1960. Locusts arrived in swarms so dense that they blocked out the sun. Entire fields disappeared in hours. There was nothing to stop them because the sparrows, which ate locusts, no longer existed. Reports describe villages where people ate tree bark, grass, and dirt. Parents offered their children for a handful of rice. Between 15 and 55 million people died. It was the greatest famine in human history. And all because no one asked, what else do sparrows eat besides grain? It was an ecological mistake caused by decisions about natural systems without understanding the invisible connections. But perhaps the most ironic mistake was the one that attempted to create peace and led to the deadliest war in history. Versailles, France. June 28, 1919. The Treaty of Versailles was supposed to end World War I and guarantee eternal peace. The terms were devastating for Germany. reparations equivalent to $442 billion today. Loss of 13% of its territory. Army limited to 100,000 soldiers. And Article 231 declared that Germany was solely responsible for the war and all the suffering. German diplomats signed because they had no choice. But they left knowing that they had signed not a peace treaty, but a sentence of national humiliation. The response would come on the streets of Berlin a decade later, when a failed Austrian corporal would shout to crowds of desperate Germans, "We have been betrayed. You have been humiliated, but I will restore our honor." The corporal's name was Adolf Hitler. And the Treaty of Versailles was his perfect campaign material. The truth about Versailles was more cruel than simple revenge. Georges Clemenceau, the French Prime Minister, openly declared, "We have not made the peace strong enough for the next 20 years. They wanted Germany to be too weak to be a threat, but strong enough to serve as a barrier against the Soviet Union." The problem: you don't create submission by humiliating a nation. You create armed resentment. And Hitler was the embodiment of that resentment. He rose to power in 1933 promising to tear up the Treaty of Versailles, and that's exactly what he did. He rebuilt the army. He reoccupied territories. He challenged every clause while France and England watched, paralyzed, too afraid to start another war to stop him from doing just that. In 1939, World War II began. 6 years later, 85 million people were dead. The Holocaust had exterminated 6 million Jews. And it could all be traced back to that room in Versailles, where diplomats chose humiliation over reconciliation. But when that war ended, the world did not have peace, just another form of conflict. The Cold War. The United States versus the Soviet Union. And between them, thousands of nuclear weapons. One mistake could end civilization. And it almost happened. Because of a bear. Duluth Air Force Base, Minnesota. October 25, 1962. 12:47 a.m. The guard saw the silhouette climbing the fence. Just 13 days earlier, Kennedy had announced that the Soviet Union was installing nuclear missiles in Cuba. The world was at its closest point to nuclear annihilation. That silhouette could only be a Soviet spy trying to sabotage the nuclear fighters. He pressed the red button. The alarm went off at all connected bases, including Vogue Field, Wisconsin, where the F-106 Delta Darts were stationed. Each one was armed with nuclear missiles. But the wiring at Vogue Field was wrong. The alarm that should have sounded was for an intruder at the fence. The alarm that sounded was for an imminent nuclear attack. The pilots woke up to the retaliation siren. There was no time for questions. The protocol was crystal clear. Soviet missiles have been launched, you have 4 minutes to take off and retaliate. They rushed to the fighters in their underwear, starting the engines. 3 aircraft on the runway, ready to drop nuclear weapons on the Soviet Union. Captain John Chenoweth realized that the protocols didn't make sense together. He didn't ask for permission. He just ran to his jeep, drove straight to the runway, and positioned himself in front of the accelerating fighter jets, waving his arms desperately. The pilots saw him and braked. The engines shut down. The world didn't end. 15 minutes later, they confirmed, a grizzly bear had climbed the fence at Duluth. Faulty wiring had turned a minor alarm into an order for World War III. And only the initiative of a captain who trusted his instincts prevented the launch. The mistakes didn't stop there. Berlin, East Germany. November 9, 1989. Gunter Schabowski was just a Communist Party spokesman who received a memo minutes before a press conference. The memo talked about new travel rules, rules that were supposed to take effect the next day. But Schabowski didn't know that. A reporter asked, "When do these new rules take effect?" Schabowski searched for the answer, couldn't find a clear date, and trying to avoid looking uninformed, improvised, "Immediately. Without delay." Those words spread through East Germany like lightning. Families separated by the wall for 28 years simply ran. Thousands converged on the checkpoints demanding passage. The guards had not received orders. Under pressure from a crowd that refused to back down, they opened the gates. People began to destroy the wall with hammers, pickaxes, and their bare hands. Pieces of concrete that symbolized division between families, all crumbling because of a misplaced phrase on national television. The Cold War effectively ended that night. The Soviet Union would collapse 2 years later. The geopolitical map changed because a bureaucrat didn't read a memo correctly. 9 mistakes. Some took seconds. Others took years. Some killed millions. Others saved millions. But they all shared one characteristic. At the time they were made, they seemed insignificant. No one looked at Inalchuck confiscating goods and thought this will destroy an empire. No one saw Columbus making miscalculations and imagined this will discover a continent. No one thought killing sparrows would end in genocide. The most catastrophic mistakes were made by ordinary people making decisions that seemed reasonable at the time. And the most heroic rescues came from people who had seconds to decide whether to follow orders or trust their instincts. But there was one last mistake. One that didn't kill anyone. One that saved countless lives. And it only happened because a scientist went on vacation and forgot to clean up his mess. London, 1928. St. Mary's Hospital. Alexander Fleming was exhausted. Years of researching ways to fight bacterial infections, trying to find something, anything, that could save wounded soldiers from dying from simple infected cuts. The First World War had ended a decade earlier, but the wounds were still killing. Antibiotics did not exist. Once the infection started, doctors could only watch their patients waste away. Fleming had conducted thousands of experiments. He had cultivated countless plates of bacteria. He had tested dozens of substances. Nothing worked. And now, in the summer of 1928, he was mentally exhausted and desperate for a break. So he did something that every scientist knows they shouldn't do. He went on vacation without properly organizing his laboratory. Petri dishes with bacterial cultures were scattered on the counter. Windows were open. Fungal spores floated through the London air. And Fleming, without a second thought about protocol, simply locked the door and went to spend 2 weeks in Scotland with his family. When he returned in September, he began cleaning up the mess. He picked up one of the culture plates, yellow colonies of Staphylococcus growing on agar, and was about to throw it in the trash when something made him stop. There was mold on the plate. A blue-green fungus had contaminated the culture. Any other scientist would have simply discarded the plate as a ruined experiment. But Fleming noticed something extraordinary. Around the fungus, the bacteria were not growing. There was a clear circle, a zone of nothingness. As if something in the mold was killing the deadly bacteria. Fleming stood there for long minutes, just staring at that contaminated plate, knowing instinctively that he was holding something that would change the world. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from a visceral understanding that this mistake, this moment of laziness, this carelessness, had revealed the secret he had been searching for years. He isolated the fungus. He discovered that it belonged to the genus Penicillium. And he named the substance that the fungus produced penicillin. But the story doesn't end there. For more than a decade, no one, not even Fleming, was able to reliably replicate the discovery or produce penicillin in sufficient quantities for medical treatment. The discovery lay dormant, a scientific curiosity with no practical application. It was not until 1939, when World War II began and the need to treat the wounded became desperate, that other scientists resumed Fleming's work. And they discovered that it wasn't just luck. It was an impossible convergence of coincidences. The fungus that contaminated Fleming's Petri dish came from a neighboring laboratory where scientists were specifically studying that type of mold. The open window allowed spores to enter. The unusually cold temperature of that London summer created perfect conditions for the fungus to grow faster than the bacteria. And Fleming looked at the plate at the exact moment before discarding it permanently. If any of these variables had been different, penicillin would not have been discovered at that moment. And without penicillin, World War II would have killed millions more. Modern surgeries would be impossible. Simple infections would continue to be death sentences. An organizational mistake, a tired scientist who didn't clean his lab before traveling, saved more human lives than any single invention in the history of medicine. Fleming won the Nobel Prize in 1945. But until the end of his life, he insisted that he did not deserve credit for genius. "I didn't invent penicillin," he said. "Nature did. I just stumbled upon it by accident." And that is the most frightening and wonderful truth about the 9 mistakes you just learned about. None of them were intentional. Inalchuck did not plan to unleash Genghis Khan and destroy his empire. Constantine V did not want to hand over his spies. Kim Jong-nam just wanted to see Disney with his son. Columbus genuinely believed in his miscalculations. Mao thought he was saving crops. The diplomats at Versailles thought they were preventing future wars. Schabowski was just trying not to appear uninformed. The guard in Duluth was protecting his base. And Fleming was simply tired and needed a vacation. Normal people. Everyday decisions. Consequences that spanned centuries. The lesson isn't that mistakes are inevitable, though they are. The lesson isn't that we should fear every little choice, though some matter more than we realize. The real lesson is this. We live in an interconnected world where small moments can trigger unpredictable cascades. And our only defense against catastrophic mistakes, and our best hope for miraculous ones, is attention, humility, and the courage to question our own certainties. Inalchuck would have prevented 1,000,000 deaths if he had paused to consider the consequences of executing merchants. Constantine would have kept his spy network if he hadn't assumed that everyone thought like him. The diplomats at Versailles would have prevented Hitler's rise if they had chosen reconciliation over humiliation. The guard in Duluth could have looked more carefully before pressing the alarm. But also, Columbus would never have discovered America if he had checked his calculations. Fleming would never have discovered penicillin if he had been more organized. Schabowski would never have brought down the Berlin Wall if he had read the memo. The paradox is that the same kinds of mistakes that kill millions also save millions. The difference is not in the mistake itself, but in the context, the timing, and, crucially, the people who decide how to respond. John Chenoweth had 15 seconds to decide whether to trust protocol or his instinct. He chose instinct and saved the world. Those scientists who took up Fleming's work could have dismissed his discovery as irrelevant. They chose to persevere and saved countless lives. You will probably never be in a position to start or stop a world war. You will probably never discover a continent or a revolutionary antibiotic. But every day, you make small decisions that have invisible consequences. Words you choose or avoid saying. Moments when you act on impulse or pause to reflect. Instants when you follow protocol or trust your judgment. And somewhere, at some future moment you will never see, one of those decisions will reverberate. Maybe saving something precious. Maybe destroying something irreplaceable. You'll never know which. That's the quiet responsibility of being alive in an interconnected world. Every action matters. Every mistake can be both disaster and discovery. And history isn't made by giants, it's made by ordinary people who, at critical moments, choose what to do next. 9 mistakes changed the world. How many mistakes will you make today? And which one will echo through the centuries? If this journey through the most crucial moments in human history has made you think differently about your own choices, subscribe to the channel, because there are countless other stories of how humanity stumbled, fell, and occasionally discovered something extraordinary in the process. And they all remind us of a fundamental truth. We are all just humans trying not to screw up. Sometimes we fail spectacularly. And sometimes, in those failures, we find exactly what we needed. The next big change in history is being prepared right now. By someone. Somewhere. Making a mistake they don't yet know will change everything. Maybe it's you.